welcome to Culture Illiterate, a podcast where four friends overthink comic book movies. I'm one of your hosts, Jake, and I accidentally watched today's movie twice in one day. With me are my friends and fellow co-hosts.
My name is Jason, and I'm seeing Blink 182 in less than a week.
My name's Sean. My fun fact is all of my free time has been spent playing Tears of the Kingdom. I need help.
My name is Matt, and fuck you, Sean. That was going to be my intro as well, because I've been wasting my life playing Tears of the Kingdom as well. In fact, I would rather be playing that than be here.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, it's nice spending time with you too, Matt.
I love you, Jake.
I wanted to I actually have a rec for today. I wanted to rec the comic Love Everlasting by Tom King, art by Ilsa. Honestly, I don't know if it's... I want to say it's Chartier, but it's Charretier. But it's a really good... It's kind of stylized, like it's like an old school, like Silver Age romance comic, but it has this... I don't want to say sci-fi and I don't want to say supernatural because it hasn't really been explained yet. And I don't want to explain what the twist is because that would ruin the fact that it's a twist. But it kind of presents itself initially that way, and then a certain thing happens or continues to happen in the stories that are told. But it's really interesting, and I haven't really read anything quite like it to this point before. So I'm still kind of waiting for things to really be revealed, but I really wanted to recommend that because I was reading an issue this week and it was just on my brain.
Interesting. I will have to look at that.
The first trade of it actually just came out as of recording this, so it's a good point to jump in.
Cool. I have a rec, I guess. Kenny Hoopla, who I've wrecked before, just put out a new song at the time that we're recording this, and I think it's one of his best. So it's called You Needed a Hit, so check that one out.
I actually have a rec as well. So because of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I've been on a bit of a James Gunn binge, and I watched his little TV series called PG Porn, which stars actual porn stars. And what it essentially is basically plot points of porn, but if without the porn. And it's very funny. You guys should definitely watch it. There are actually episodes of it on YouTube. So if you like humor, if you like James Gunn, you should watch it. Or if you want to know some porn star names to look up online, you can watch it as well.
I have
situation.
also seen that actually, and that's great.
Yeah,
it's great.
Attest to that.
It's great. It's so good. It's so good. I love the sound effects. I love it. There was like one of my favorite scenes. It's like one of the first episodes, I believe, and he was supposed to be this this like mechanic guy, and then he says, "Let me take a look at it," and starts screwing the air, and then the sound effects come in very loudly as if he was doing something. It's incredible. It's incredible. You guys should watch it.
Absolutely. I back that rec.
I back it too. It's beautiful. I'll steal the wreck of... I thought Matt was going to wreck Tears of the Kingdom too, but I guess it'll just be me because... I'm obsessed with it, but yeah, I'll wreck that. It's glorious. I love spit
Recommend
roasting.
the game that sold like millions and millions of copies that 3 days,
sold
Sean.
like millions of copies.
You wait. You love spit roasting?
What?
Could you elaborate?
They're
What?
like... Have you not seen any of like there's like so many memes of like people doing horrible things to like these Koroks or these little fairy forest spirits in the game, and some people have been like spit roasting them and like crucifying them and doing terrible things to them.
And we're not talking about like the pleasurable way. We're talking about the probably torturous way of roasting them over a fire. The not good way, the not fun one. And then there's a bunch of other ones. My favorite is launching them with rockets and sending them hundreds of feet in the air and them careening towards a cavern. That's my favorite.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you are a fan of committing war crimes, you should play Tears of the Kingdom because you don't just get to bully children of the forest. All the enemies you can make you can make torture devices to kill all your enemies. There are already torture chambers that slowly kill you, and it's incredible. People are very creative when it comes to killing things. This is what I learned when watching people play Tears of the Kingdom. And it's some of the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life.
Also, big Fire Penis Man.
Fire Penis Man?
I love it as soon as you give people creativity in a video game, one of the first things they would do is commit war atrocities or crucify them. Or
create a giant wooden figure with a flaming penis.
That's true.
It's war crimes.
Oh,
and penises.
Sean.
I
need to send you a video of a guy who's turned those penis statues into actual working weapons. I need to send you that.
Oh God.
Well, that sounds quite lovely.
Well, I don't really know how to transition from Flaming Wooden Penis Man, so I'm just really not gonna try. This episode we're covering Blade Trinity, released December 8th, 2004, and written and directed by David S. Goyer, who was also the scribe of both Blade and Blade 2, and shot by Gabriel Beristain. It stars Wesley Snipes as Blade, Chris Christopherson as Whistler, Dominic Purcell as Drake, aka Dracula, Jessica Biel as Abigail Whistler, Ryan Reynolds as Hannibal King, Parker Posey as Danica Talos, Natasha Lyonne as Summerfield, and Patton Oswalt as Hedges. We have already talked, I know, previously about Matt I believe, hadn't seen any of the Blade movies before. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that the three of us had watched them all together once at one point during COVID. But just a quick reason why I watched this movie twice in one day and how I did that sort of accidentally is because I've committed to, when we do these, if there's an extended cut, I always watch the extended cut. Kind of almost regardless of whether or not it's actually better. But this whole podcast is a bit, and I couldn't look my friends, and especially not Jason, in the face if I didn't commit to the bit. So I had like 25 minutes left on Blade Trinity when I realized there's an unrated extended cut with an alternate ending. And at that point I was pretty much at the two endings anyway. So I was like, I guess I'm going to just finish this and then run it back. So in like one sitting, I watched Blade Trinity twice. So,
Wait. Was the extended edition 2 hours?
Yeah, I think the extended edition's like an hour and 55.
Yeah, it's like 9 minutes longer than the original version.
Yeah,
I think that's the one I watched. I believe that's the one I watched.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. You'll know for sure when we talk about the two different endings. But another thing I wanted to say is this movie has a lot of interesting facts involving its production. So just to kind of kick things off before even like plot, it's that Wesley Snipes tried to strangle director David Goyer during a confrontation about the direction of the movie. And that the night after this incident and being intimidated on set, Goyer was out drinking at a strip club with members of the crew where he met a biker gang. And according to Patton Oswalt, who did an interview largely about the production of this movie, which I will be quoting a lot, David says to them, "I'll pay for all your drinks if you show up the set tomorrow and pretend to be my security." They agreed to the deal and showed up the next day while Wesley freaked out and went back to his trailer. As for Goyer and Snipes' relationship post-Blade, Goyer said that it was one of the most personally and professionally difficult things I've ever been through. And when asked if he had spoken to Snipes since, he responded, No, we've never spoken again. Just let's get into this movie with that in mind.
I love a movie where we start out with lore behind the making of it before we even get into the movie.
We can go into the Wesley Snipes is crazy rabbit hole for a long, long time, but unfortunately this is not that type of podcast.
It should be now. We're changing track.
Changing tracks. This is now just a Wesley Snipes pod. Breaking down his life and career.
As it should be, to be honest.
And in this point in his life, there was a small group of vampires that were going to investigate an ancient tomb in the Syrian desert, which they believe belonged to the first vampire, Dracula, who for some reason they now call Drake. So anyway, if you can't tell, we're doing the plot summary at this point. But to keep Blade from interfering, they frame him for the murder of a human familiar. FBI agents subsequently locate Blade's hideout and kill his mentor and friend, Abraham Whistler. Demoralized, Blade surrenders and is arrested. The movie also starts off with Ryan Reynolds' Hannibal King narrating, and King also, jumping forward, narrates at the end of the movie. And I kind of wanted to just say, like, why. I don't really understand why they have him narrate the beginning and end of the movie.
Yeah, I found that very bizarre.
Because he's Ryan Reynolds. He has top billing. That's why.
But like in general,
2004, did
this was way before Ryan Reynolds had made his name.
Well, then maybe the director liked him a lot.
Maybe. But it's like, it's weird that, I mean, narration in movies is kind of weird in general, because it's like, well, just tell the fucking story. But also having it, like, come out with Ryan Reynolds narrating it, it's just weird that, like, okay, it's a Blade movie, but then the first thing we fucking hear is Ryan Reynolds' dumbass voice talking about whatever the fuck. Like, it just seems bizarre.
If you were gonna do a narrator, one, why is it only in the beginning and the very end? And two, I feel like it should have been one of the Whistlers. Because I get that, like, it probably feels out of character for Blade to be narrating and, like, waxing poetic or whatever, but it's a weird choice of character, and I already don't like. This is one of the earliest examples of Ryan Reynolds playing himself, and like on occasion that works, but I just find it really annoying in this case.
I mean, like, if I wanted to give a whole spiel about that, and I'm not going to, but like a generalized idea of how I felt about Ryan Reynolds' movies, he himself is acting as he does, and it doesn't fit with the rest of the movie.
Well, it's just, like, irresponsible. I feel like when you hire Ryan Reynolds, like, you know what he does, so it's irresponsible to cast him as anything else.
Well, not in this case, since it is 2004.
That's true, but still.
But you still went ahead with it anyways.
Exactly.
You know, bringing it back to Wesley Snipes being a little crazy, Blade Trinity fact number 2. Wesley Snipes reportedly pushed to have a sex scene with Jessica Biel's Abigail Whistler, but this was denied. Snipes has also noted in the DVD commentary on Blade 2 that he really wanted to have a sex scene for the third film. You know, do with that what you will.
Why?
And why with, like, the daughter of his father figure?
Because it's hot.
Is it just because he's like, that'd be cool?
There actually is a sex scene in the unrated extended cut, but it's with Drake and, Parker Posey's character, not
That's a sex
Snipes. It's not a very sexy one, but it serves the role when he, like, yeah.
It serves the role.
I mean, that tells you, Matt going, that's a sex scene, tells you everything you need to know about, like, the quality of said scene. Anyway.
Well, that kind of quality is basically sprinkled throughout this film, but we'll get to that eventually.
Yeah, it's not very good, is it?
No, it is not. Spoilers.
The vampire's familiars have arranged for authorities to turn Blade over to them. He's rescued by Hannibal King and the aforementioned Abigail Whistler, Abraham Whistler's illegitimate daughter, who invite Blade to join their band of vampire hunters, the Night Stalkers. From them, Blade learns that Danica Talos, an old enemy of Hannibal King's, who had turned Hannibal into a vampire before he was then cured. Also, he says that she has fangs in her vagina, and I'm, like, not 100% sure if he's just, like, joking or not. You know,
that was one of the
few conclusions.
That was one of the few times where I couldn't tell if it was a joke or not, just because of the way that it was structured.
Yeah, but that's what makes me like it, to be honest.
Yeah, you're, like, not sure?
I'm like, I don't know what they're going for here. Like, is this supposed to be, haha, fangs in vagina, or is this, like, just terrible dialogue? And either way, it's bad dialogue, but I like that it keeps me guessing.
It keeps me on my toes.
I don't know what this movie's going for.
So she, Danica Talos, along with her possible vagina fangs, have revived Drake, again, Dracula, with the goal of using his powers to cure vampires of their weaknesses. As the first of the vampires, Drake has been able to survive in sunlight and has never had to evolve. Usually it kind of goes the opposite way. When you're the first thing, you subsequently evolve to be better, but I guess not here. So what did you guys think about the movie to this point? Because my main thing is it's a hell of a lot of setup, and I wish they didn't kill Whistler, because all of the supporting cast sucks, and he was awesome.
Yeah, that was the one thing I was going to say that was, like, the worst part, was that in the second one, they have a whole thing about, like, the sadness of, like, Whistler dying, and then here it's, like, so unceremonious and it just happens. Like, I had to...
Well, the way it happens makes me feel like he's a side character that's only there as cannon fodder, when in reality he's actually one of the biggest parts of the first two movies.
Yeah, it gave me like the biggest amount of whiplash.
And it's like so early and so quick that it's like, oh, this just happened. Like, oh, this character we just grew to love over the past two movies, it's just done like that. We're not gonna linger on that, really. Like, it just was, like, gone. Like, that was weird to me. How they just kind of, like, whatever.
Well, to be fair... Actually, no way, there's nothing that I can say to defend this. It sucks.
Mad attempts so hard.
I tried. I honestly tried. I thought about it for a second. And I couldn't think of anything. And the worst part is that they couldn't really replace Whistler with any other character, because all the new characters they introduce either died or suck, which is all of them. All of them sucked. Even the ones that died sucked. So
they
the only one that was fun
or
was
they died and sucked.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what happened. The only time I had fun with these characters, ever had fun with these characters was when they were introducing them, and I saw Patton Oswalt. I went, "Oh, it's Patton Oswalt," and that's it. That was literally it.
That really is like the kind of the highlight of this movie, that like you see a guy that you know from other things that are actually good.
You know, speaking of Patton Oswalt, Blade Trinity fact number 3, Patton Oswalt once told the AV Club that Wesley Snipes wouldn't come out of his trailer and would just sit there and smoke weed all day, which he said is fine with him because I had all these DVDs I wanted to catch up on.
You know, he took advantage of the situation, I guess.
That's fair.
It really does seem like everyone in this movie is like really miserable and doesn't want to be here, and that is part of the reason that I think the movie is so much worse than the prior two.
No, I think that, but also in a sense, I think that makes it good, because it's like they feel the same way you do while you're watching it. And you can just tell.
It permeates the entire movie.
Yeah.
Right into the audience.
It's immersive.
Immersive, yeah.
It just, I don't know. I don't like watching it when you can tell, like, Snipes and the rest of the cast definitely didn't get along well, especially when you compare their scenes together with scenes between, like, Blade and Whistler in the first two movies. And it's just, like, granted in the movie there's supposed to be a good amount of tension between the Night Stalkers and Blade because they operate so differently, but it's just, like, kind of unpleasant.
Agreed.
There is you're right. There is no chemistry between any of the actors and actresses. In fact, it's the opposite. It's quite clear that they are very uncomfortable with each other, and that Wesley Snipes is a crazy person. But it is unfortunate because the last two films were honestly pretty great. And even though some of the characters have no character in the previous films, they were at least fun. You can't even say that for these characters. And they were supposed to be more dimensional than the ones introduced in 2, like the vampire game in 2. That's much more memorable than these guys. Like, I don't even know the guy's name, but Ron Perlman's vampire was great. I liked him. He was a dick.
He was a dick.
Yeah, even the unlikable characters at least served their purpose of being unlikable in the previous films. These ones are just kind of meh.
Yeah, that's one of the things I also didn't like was that I know we're going to get more into this later, but Dracula really never stood out to me at all.
You mean Drake?
Drake. Sorry, yeah, I mean Drake. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, we only really get a taste of this in the beginning, but like the first action scene that we get, this movie has incredibly, compared to the other two, terrible editing when it comes to the fight scenes. It's so choppy. I'm confused because the other ones didn't really do that. This one...
Basically, the reason for that is because they didn't give a shit, and they didn't give a shit about fighting choreography like they did for the first two, and so they just kind of just did whatever, probably cut costs, I don't know. They probably just thought, oh, if we make enough cuts, we can make it seem like they know what they're doing and that they can fight. No, it's just a convoluted mess, and your eyes hurt. Oh, and especially if eyes hurting, that introduction scene of Drake was one of the worst introduction scenes I've ever experienced. Mostly because my eyes were burning. I saw stars for like at least a minute after that was over.
I realized
I was close to having epilepsy, like the Porygon episode of Pokemon. Like it was bad.
I also realized that this has 2 different editors compared to the first 2. But it seems like each movie had different editors to begin with.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that it's unbelievable that the second one was so decent was because it's like it was almost an entirely new crew, and yet it still turned out pretty well.
Some of it can fall on directing too. I don't know if this was David Goyer's second directorial attempt. And Goyer as a writer is kind of hit or miss. He really hit on the first two, I think. He really missed on the third writing-wise as the writer of all three. But I also think he may have just been a much worse director. And then it leads to the issue of, well, how do we edit these fights if they're not well shot? And if the actors aren't good at what they're doing, well, then we have to make a lot of cuts. Because I actually think, like, other than that, it's a perfectly fine edit on the movie. It's not like overly done, so it leads me to wonder if they're just having to cut around stuff.
Yeah, that would be my assumption, because it's not terrible outside of the fight scenes. It's in the fight scenes where it gets choppy and bad.
Yeah, it's just it gets rough at point. It looks very like made for TV. I'm not gonna lie.
That's actually what I had. Sorry, Matt, go.
I was just gonna say the worst part was that it was very clear when they were fighting each other what is that the punches clearly don't have any weight, or like they didn't even bother trying to make it look like they punched someone, right? Is that they whiffed the air and then the person reacted to it. They didn't even exaggerate it at all. Or maybe like the actor would just put too little effort into the punch, and yet the stunt guy went like a Power Ranger, like a Power Ranger enemy. Like it. In fact, it reminded me of Super Sentai fight scenes, except for worse. Because in the best part about like Super Sentai series was that they just had, because they were in suits, they could just have people who are stunt people just be in the suits, and they're just super over the top with their moves. Everything is exaggerated, and so that's what makes it fun. But this one, because for some reason they just have to have close-ups on the actor's face, they can't like switch him out with a stunt woman or stuntman, and so they have to fight, and they don't know how to fight, and so they don't have that energy. And so when they throw a punch and the stunt guy just goes wow like a Power Ranger villain, it just doesn't have that effect. It's like, you know, that time where like you're trying to like please like your kid brother, right? Maybe he like throws a punch at you and you go wow, like all the way back to please him and make him happy. That's kind of like what these fight scenes remind me of. I like the big brother little brother thing dynamic.
One of the first things I had like written down in my notes was based off of what Jason had just said too, is this that the movie looks like a cable TV show. So I definitely agree on that front. Like, I don't know what happened to the production value, because I feel like the first two looked really expensive, and this is the most expensive of the three budget-wise. Now, I'm not accounting for inflation here, but I can't imagine in 6 years it would be that much of a difference. But the first Blade movie in 98 had a budget of $45 million. Blade 2 in 2002 had a budget of $55 million. And then Blade Trinity in 2004 had a budget of $65 million. So I don't really know what happened, and I'm not sure where the fault lies. I'm not knowledgeable in terms of technical information about like cameras used and production styles used for sets and whatnot. But this movie just looks so flat, like it's like a multicam sitcom, and there's nothing cinematic or dynamic about it, whether that be in just the basic visuals or in camera movement. And it's just such a downgrade from what we'd seen in the other two that did so much with a relatively limited budget.
You know, I'd also want to add to this is kind of a little bit of a sidetrack from that too, but the opening for this movie just isn't as good either. Like, there are memorable openings to both of the first two movies, and this one just doesn't have that at all.
Costuming is worse.
Everything
looks like a fan film on YouTube.
That's what I'm saying. It looks very like CW on TV kind of movie, and it's not that. It's just disappointing.
Yeah.
One of the issues, I think, is just this movie's set in daylight a lot. The first two Blade movies, even when they're out during the day, it's very overcast, the weather. I feel like there's just a lot of like sunshiny outdoor time in this movie, and that's very strange to me because it kind of loses that like seedy secret underworld vibe that the original couple Blade movies had, and instead they're just kind of like walking around in a way that when Blade like crashes into places in the first movie that are like normal human things and the vampire stuff's in the back, everyone looks at him like he's weird. But there's scenes in this movie where Blade's just in broad daylight and nobody reacts to it, and it makes it feel very out of place. So I just think if the movie like, you know, like actually had taken the time to make it so it seemed overcast or was just at night more, that would have gone a long way.
Well, yeah, that's actually a really good point, because a lot of things that make Blade great was the atmosphere and the aesthetic and color palette. That is all lost in this movie because of the fact that they're in daylight a lot. And a lot of settings are a lot less unique. The first two movies, they had... well, the thing is about the vampire places was that they were very distinct. It looks like the places that they live looks like some place some billionaire bought, and they thought the place looked artsy, so they had it made. That's the places that they had, right? And so it made it look unique and look cool. But in this one, it was just buildings. That's it. That's really the only word I can describe the setting of Blade 3 was buildings. One building, other building, they're all eventually just the same. And even the final setting wasn't as fun. Like it just wasn't unique. That's the thing. It's like I'm trying to like, I watched this movie an hour ago, by the way. I'm trying to remember like unique settings, and none of them come up. And I still remember stuff from Blade 2, which is something we watched weeks ago. So it just goes to show you how much of a downgrade this movie is.
A lot of the movie is set in like the lair of the Night Stalkers. They spend a lot of time there. They're trying to develop this sundog ammunition as well as various vampire cures. So they created this experimental bioweapon known as Daystar, which is capable of killing vampires at the genetic level. However, they need a pure blood source to make it effective, and Drake is too powerful to kill via normal means, so they hope that the virus will kill him, and that with his pure vampire blood in the mix, it will ensure that the rest of the species is wiped out. But they fear that could also include Blade. They're not sure how it would impact a half vampire, half human hybrid. You know, while we're here, Blade Trinity fun fact number 4. Wesley Snipes did not call any of his castmates by name, and specifically would only refer to Ryan Reynolds as that cracker. Speaking under terms of anonymity, an executive on the film claimed Snipes would say things like, "Tell that cracker to get out of my eye line," and "Tell that cracker to get his lines right."
Listen, man.
I love it.
Say what you will, but that's incredible. Do you realize, like,
It is genuinely incredible.
How many people have the ability to say that they were given the nickname That Cracker by Wesley Snipes? You know what I mean? Like, probably not that many. Well, maybe there's a few. I don't know what Wesley Snipes might be throwing that around a lot. But my point being, I would be honored by that. Like, that, come on, man. You know what I mean?
It's definitely special.
Definitely. You know what? I am curious about Wesley Snipes, and Drake was curious about Blade. So he isolates him from the rest of the Night Stalkers in order to try to kind of test him. And he explains his view that all humans and vampires are inferior in his eyes to himself, and that he intends to wipe them all from the earth. Abigail finds evidence of the vampires' plans for human subjugation, which is a network of blood farms where brain-dead humans are drained of their blood for vampire consumption. Blade deactivates the farm's life support systems and executes the familiar who had been rounding up homeless humans for the vampires. And I want to say, in fairness to this movie, the blood farm thing is genuinely, I think, horrifying and like absolutely peak, and I wish like the rest of the movie had that vibe, because this is like the only set that is like eerie, seems to have really high production value. It just looks like row after row of like human beings if they were like vacuum sealed in a bag and had their blood being slowly drained from them, because the full thing is that the familiars are going and taking homeless people that people won't report missing, and any people like in that scenario, and they're just making them brain dead, and that so that they are alive and are a constant source of blood, and they're just like vacuum sealing them and just consistently cycling blood out from them, and it's just like eerie warehouse just filled with like rows and rows and rows of this, and it's genuinely like a really freaky sight. So I do appreciate that angle, and they call it the vampire final solution, which obviously has a lot of connotation to it, but like props to the movie there. I think that's a really cool like plot point, especially for like a big finale movie, to like what's the ultimate plan for vampires.
Yeah, I agree. It's just that, like, I don't know, like that part's cool, but it's just that the build to it is not enticing in any way, so it's like just not that exciting when it gets to that point to me.
Yeah, I think like I'm with Jason on that one. I really like the idea, and I really like that it was in there, and I thought the execution of showing it off was really good, but there's no build up to it. There's no real lead up to it. There's nothing that makes me go like, there's nothing that makes me think that like, oh, this is what this has been building up to. There's no build up. It just sort of shows up and happens kind of in a way. It just doesn't feel like they do a lot to get you to that point.
I guess. I mean, that's all fair. I guess I don't personally feel like I need like a huge amount of build up as much as it's just more of the fact that for me that it's just isolated. Like it's really cool, but it doesn't make up for the fact that like 90% of the movie isn't really cool. You do get one of my issues is like Blade doesn't really get the great one-liners he gets in the first couple. Obviously Whistler dying in the first act, he doesn't really get any either. Most of the one-liners go to Hannibal King, who's a very grating character in my opinion. But I do like when Blade kills the familiar in this scene, and he tells him he'll let him run and count to 20, and as soon as the guy starts running, he just says 20 and shoots him in the back.
Oh yeah, that was funny.
That was fantastic.
That is another thing I will add to, and I assume this is mostly for production reasons, given everything. But like, it does feel kind of sad to see less and less of like Blade in this movie. It feels like he's to a degree relegated to being a side character in his own movie, which is very strange because they focus so heavily on, once they come into play anyways, they focus so heavily on Hannibal King and Whistler
Part 2.
And that's a shame because like most of what they do, most of their dialogue, those two characters, it's like this movie is like 65% exposition and the rest is just trying really hard to be edgy. Like the first two had crude language as well, but a lot of the one-liners felt really effortless with like Hannibal King is just there to like spit out one-liners with like the speed of Amazon shipping and also give exposition. The one line is I don't know, this movie is like, obviously we're quite vulgar on this podcast. Obviously we love the first two movies that can be quite vulgar, but there's a difference between being vulgar for like a reason, for style and tone and emphasizing certain lines, and then just saying fuck for saying fuck's sake. Like the one line is that I had written down is, "And when the fuck did you see my dick fuckface?" And I was just like, you found that acceptable to put in this movie? You just think bad words are funny. You're not like
it's
thinking why.
Well, yeah, it's very like when a kid first discovers cursing and they just throw it in all the time because they think it sounds cool. It feels very much like that.
Yeah, it's definitely what it feels like, and it just, like you said, there's a time where it can be like a good thing for the tone or for, you know, the dialogue, whatever they're going for, and in this case it just feels like it's overused, and to a point it gets grating. Like you said, that one line, that was one that stuck out to me when I watched through it again, because I was like, who? Like, I get it, it's the idea of like this guy who's like a big muscle dude who's like getting angry at fucking Ryan Reynolds for saying something stupid, and it's the dumbest thing ever, but it's not funny. It's not like, it's supposed to be like he has the mind of a 5-year-old getting mad at him for saying, "When did you see my dick?" And it's not funny. Yeah, it just isn't.
Exactly.
You know what is funny? Blade Trinity fact number 5. After their physical altercation, David Goyer and Wesley Snipes stopped talking altogether. Snipes instead communicated with the director only by passing post-it notes, all of which were signed from Blade.
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I love the idea of him still being in character, walking around, or just staying in his trailer, but staying in character.
I hope he still signs things from Blade.
Oh God.
My pipe dream wish was, I know Whistler was created for the movies, he wasn't in the comics, but when they announced the Blade reboot, my pipe dream wish, and I know this is just dumb fan service and I'm usually against that, but I don't care, was that they would bring Whistler back but have it be played by Snipes.
Oh, that would be beautiful.
That would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I'm too weak to be too highbrow for that. That would have been perfect. So, returning to this Night Stalker's hideout, Abigail and Blade find all of them dead except for King and Zoe, the daughter of Summerfield, Daystar's creator, both of whom have been taken captive. Also, I mean, he says all of them dead. That really just leaves Hedges, Patton Oswalt's character, and Summerfield herself. But anyway, a recording left by Summerfield reveals that Drake's blood is all that's needed to make it complete and effective, but there wasn't enough time to run tests to see if Daystar would kill Blade as well. Hannibal King is tortured by the vampires for information, but refuses to talk, even when they threaten to turn him and force him into to feed on Zoe's blood. So at this point, I think we've kind of beat around the bush a lot in regards to Drake himself and how much of a lame villain Drake is.
Well, that's the thing, is that there's not much to talk about when to talk about Drake. The most fun part about him was his name, because I just think about the rapper every time I see him and every time they refer to him. And it was really funny when they first infiltrated his base, I'm pretty sure. And then Ryan Reynolds just went, "It's Drake! It's Drake! It's Drake!" And it was just a really funny sentence in my head. I didn't even think about the fact that it was supposed to be Dracula. I don't know what they were even thinking when they thought about that. But, oh my goodness, he is just really boring of a villain because he has no presence. And he's not even the most interesting character in the antagonist side. And I'm not even saying that any of the antagonists in this movie are good. It's just that he's one of the worst. And the worst part is that he's the main villain.
I feel like he's not even in it that much, and when he is, he's just kind of boring. There's nothing. He almost feels like the brute that the main villain brings in a movie. He doesn't feel like the main villain in a movie.
Yeah, and it's so bad because it's look, if you think of vampires at all, you think of Dracula, and making him the final villain for a trilogy of Blade movies seems like such a great idea. But then he shows up and he's not there. He's there are maybe only 3 scenes I can remember, and that's when they first find him murdering people in a random store with vampire memorabilia, and then the end.
Yep.
The worst part was that they didn't even make him unique. He's just as you said, a brute. His special strength is that he has an exoskeleton. That's it.
And I didn't think that looked that good either. It looked very overly designed and still felt like it was...
You know what he looked like? He looked like the devil from a Tenacious D movie.
Yes, that's absolutely
yes.
He looked like Satan.
And you know what? In that movie, it's cool because it's supposed to be cheesy and funny. In this movie, it sucks.
And it doesn't help.
It sucks.
It doesn't help that the character doesn't feel like Dracula at all either. And some of that's Dominic Purcell, no shade at all to him. I'm not super familiar with a lot of his work. I know people love that show Prison Break. He was on some of those CW DC shows actually as a Heatwave, and he's really fun in those. He hams it up a lot in a really, really entertaining, good, fun way. But he's so horribly miscast here. And then on top of that, he's miscast for both regular Dracula as well as the weird modern reimagining they're going for. And the modern reimagining itself is just so dumb. I don't want to, if I want to see Dracula, like Sean said, as the big final villain in a Blade trilogy, which makes so much sense. I don't want to see he wears a chain and a leather jacket and a t-shirt, and it's I don't want to see an Irish Guido as Dracula, and I don't want them to call him Drake. I want him to be suave, and I want to understand why he could like look in someone's eyes and control them, and like I don't, and why you would like invite him in. I don't. I'm reading Bram Stoker's Dracula for the first time right now. I'm like only a little over a third of the way in, but I think like even if you've never read any of Dracula and you've probably encountered that character in other adaptations, and there's that, you know, he's a count, and there's an air of sophistication I think about the character, and an air of charm, and then hides a monstrous demeanor. But I think like both the monstrous demeanor and the sophistication and charm are just entirely absent. And like y'all all three said, he's just a dumb brute, and then he randomly like hulks out into a big red beetle looking fucker at points.
Yeah.
That is just like an uninspired design that doesn't really do anything for me.
The most inspiring part of his design was that they gave him a U-neck instead of a V-neck. That's it. That's literally it. He has like none of the aesthetics of a Dracula and none of the charm of a Dracula. Like, yeah, you can say like, oh, they didn't do those old school Dracula powers because they're cheesy or they're boring. Who fucking cares? And that's that. Every time someone says that, it's just been disproven time and time and again that if you adapt it well enough, modern audiences of any time will accept it. You just, I don't know, just... It's not easy as I'm making out to be. I'm not going to try to say that or insinuate that in any way possible, but it just goes to prove that you can still, you know, make Dracula in the modern age or any age, and people will still find it cool.
It's just kind of a...
It's just here's the thing, right? Is that what they went with is just so uninspiring that they might as well just done like the classic Dracula powers, right? Just do that. They couldn't have done like a... Sorry, what?
It's just kind of a bummer because he's so easily the worst of the villains in the Blade trilogy.
Yeah, he's supposed to be the last one.
But he's Dracula.
Yeah, he has
getting let down by Dracula.
He has the potential to be the best, and they made him the worst.
You know, when during that final fight scene, when they were like crashing through all these windows, that's the thing about this movie. There's a really weird like thing of throwing people or people jumping out of windows in this movie. I don't know why. Were they just trying to like burn budget, or they just thought it looked cool? It wasn't even real windows a lot of the time. It was like CGI windows. It's just a waste of money. So I don't know what they were doing. It's like they were burning the money or giving it away. I don't know what they were doing. Also,
I know what...
I was just gonna say, like, real quick, during the final fight scene with Dracula, when they were in that building with all the window panes, I just thought if they went with like a traditional Dracula, wouldn't it be so cool if like they had, because it kind of reminded me of, you know, the hallways of mirrors in John Wick. Do you remember that scene in John Wick 2? Can you imagine something like that, but with Dracula, who doesn't appear in mirrors?
Ooh, that's a good point. That would have been so sick.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, if you stuck with just traditional Dracula, you could have done like a fight like that, where he's literally invisible and he plays having trouble tracking him and stuff like that. It's something at least somewhat creative instead of just two like, I don't know, hunks just throwing at each other, and the swordplay is so boring. It's closer to Zorro than Blade, and even then it sucked. Like, Zorro fights are still like 10 times better than this.
They tried to they dumbed down the character and tried to reinvent the wheel rather than just using something that's a classic for a reason. Like, you're fortunate enough to have this villain that you can legally use because he's public domain, and that not only do you have the literary classic to go off of, but also like the history of Dracula in Marvel Comics, and they just like eschew all of that to just make him like, I don't know if they thought they were too cool for it, but it doesn't work.
I think that's literally it. Like, they thought they were too cool for old school, and yet proven again and again, old school is better.
Wesley Snipes is too cool for people, and he reportedly, Blade Trinity fun fact number 6, stayed in character for the entirety of filming, not acknowledging anyone, not addressing him as Blade. He introduced himself as Blade as well. Patton Oswalt, who had one day of filming with Snipes and has not interacted with him since, corroborates that Snipes introduced himself as Blade and would not answer to anything else.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And you know what? As well, he shouldn't. To be fair, he's Blade.
I mean, in terms of the dumb publicity stunt method acting shit you hear about sometimes, that's Like, he just wanted to be called Blade.
Like, I don't even know how to react to that.
Agreed.
So, Blade and Abigail arrive and free the captives. Drake eventually bests Blade in combat and prepares to kill him with his own sword, but Abigail fires the Daystar arrow. Drake catches it before it strikes him and drops it to the floor by Blade, not realizing the danger it poses to him. Abigail shoots Drake with another regular arrow, this time wounding him. Blade uses the distraction to stab Drake with the Daystar arrow, triggering a chemical reaction that completes the Daystar virus, releasing it into the air. Blade Trinity fun fact number 7. For Blade Trinity, Wesley Snipes was reportedly on set only for close-ups, with everything else being done with a stand-in.
Oh, God.
Does that make a lot more sense now?
Yes.
Yes.
Especially the action scenes, because they probably didn't have him on set to do action scenes.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
As an action star.
Yeah, yikes. That's gonna be tough to make an action movie without your star.
God, I can't even imagine having worked on the production of this movie. It's a fever dream, man.
The virus becomes airborne, killing Dracula and the rest of the vampires. As Drake slowly succumbs to his wounds and the virus, he praises Blade for fighting honorably, but warns him that he will eventually succumb to his need for blood, thus proving that Blade is the future of the vampire race. Using the last of his power, Drake shapeshifts into Blade. The FBI recover the body, but as they begin the autopsy, it transforms back into the deceased Drake. King narrates that Drake's final transformation was a gift so that Blade could escape, leaving Blade free to continue fighting his never-ending war against the forces of evil. Now, in the alternate ending of the movie, in the unrated extended edition, the body in the morgue does not transform back into Drake. Instead, Blade awakens as the autopsy begins and attacks the doctors and FBI agents present. The scene ends as he menacingly approaches a cowering orderly. King narrates that the virus did not kill Blade, as the human half of his heart did not stop beating. It only slowed down, causing him to enter a comatose state until his body was ready to fight again. There's also a third alternate ending that really was just basically a pseudo post-credit scene that you could tack onto either of these endings, and it's the Night Stalkers reappear 6 months later, having tracked a werewolf to a casino in Asia, and you actually see the werewolf. It's not bad looking for like an unfinished scene. You can look it up on YouTube. But yeah, so that's how the movie ends. How do you guys feel about how things wrap up?
Confusing.
Why?
Yeah. Bizarre.
It's so disappointing. For what started out so great and was like such a fun trilogy to start with anyways, man, you just fumble the bag so hard.
It was just like it's so upsetting because like so many movies have bad sequels, and then so many movies that have good sequels have a bad third movie, and this one could have been one that got away from having a bad movie in the franchise, and it almost did. It was 2 out of 3, and then they shit the bed and made a bad ending too.
I feel like that's what happens to a lot of movies, especially in like mid 2000s. They just don't stick the landing at all.
That was the one thing I was going to mention too, is that like it seems like a weird curse that comic book movies started getting, and I guess Blade's the first one to get to the end of their trilogy and have like the third terrible movie. Because
well, Superman 3.
Okay, well, yeah, there's that. But well, I which is why, like, yeah, for Matt's credit, it is more the early 2000s where you see this happen.
It's probably mostly just, I guess, executives trying to get in the success, and they just get too handy in artist creations and creative decisions. Although I'm not sure about Blade though, because the fact that they have different crews for every movie, that's something that's like a whole other problem altogether. I honestly don't know like how to diagnose it or who to say whose fault it is. Maybe executives. It's easy to blame executives because they're shitty. I hate them.
Overall, like, I feel like the whole movie is summed up as underwhelming. Like, I know, feel free to, like, please do let me know if you guys disagree with this, but, like, honestly, in terms of some of the crap we've watched, this is much better than a lot of it. Like, don't get me wrong, the movie's really bad. I think this is a bad movie, but I don't think it's as bad in the same league as, like, Supergirl or Swamp Thing or, you know, the Superman sequels, things, and Catwoman. I think this is leaps and bounds better than Catwoman that we covered last. But it's just really underwhelming when you had 2 really good movies and you're hoping for them to stick the landing, and the actions just underwhelming. The final fight's underwhelming. The whole movie and the resolution is like, the resolution, I guess, is fine. It wraps up, like, I don't know how else you would end the movie, but it's just not, I don't feel anything.
Yeah, I mean, like, the biggest takeaway that I have for this is that I feel like a dad, where it's like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Because, like, God, you set yourself up so well. The first two movies were great in their own respect, and then you have this, and it's just like, dang. And again, don't get me wrong, there are parts of this that are genuinely interesting, that I think are like, that there are parts of this that do shine, that make me laugh, that make me go like, okay, I feel like this is the first two movies shining through a little bit. But like, the majority of it is just like, you were so close, and it's just so disappointing.
Yeah, it's just really you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing exciting about it.
I think, well, I'll get into that later in my end thoughts. You know what? It's time for Blade Trinity Fun Fact number 8. This movie actually has a follow-up, Blade the Series, which ran for 13 episodes on Spike TV and recast Blade with the rapper Kirk Jones, better known as Sticky Fingers. The show received mixed reviews, with the pilot and finale co-written by David Goyer and Jeff Johns. And it's supposed to be set in the world of the movie, following up with Blade hunting vampires that survived the Daystar virus.
I really want to watch that. I'm really intrigued by that. I'm not gonna lie.
I may. I have to at least watch the pilot and see. I feel like there's a few... That's random. So there's a few random things I do want to mention, and that is, what the fuck did they do with Parker Posey's hair in the third act? I don't know if you guys remember that, but it's like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, you just kind of, it's like the front to the middle of her head is like sticking up, and then there's a ponytail, and then it's up and back. Do you guys remember what I'm talking about?
I know exactly
know
what you're talking about. It was so fucking weird.
You know, I was kind of tuned out of the movie at that point, but it was one of the things that got me back into it, where I just went, what the fuck is that on her head? That's it.
Yeah. They do mention it in the movie, which then kind of ruins it for me, because I'm like, okay, now you're just doing it because you think it's funny, and now you just took all the wind out of the sails. I do like the vampire Pomeranian that the villains have. I think that's cool, and it has like the Reaper mouth.
Oh yeah, that was cute. I like the dog.
And
I like all three of the dogs.
As much as I found a lot of the dialogue edgy, there's 3 lines that really did stick with me. And it's, how about you take the sugar frosted fuck off the tip of my dick? And then 2 great insults of, you cock juggling thunder cunt and you horse humping bitch.
Yeah, those were some good lines.
Those were good standouts. I did appreciate those, and I always remember those.
Just some like stray thoughts that I felt like I wanted to get out of my head before we like did wrap up thoughts, because they just felt important to me. I mean, a vampire Pomeranian and Blade the series, you know. Speaking of endings, by the way, talking about the 2 different alternate endings, do any of you have a strong preference? I personally actually prefer the theatrical ending. I think it's a lot clearer, versus the alternate ending makes it very unclear if it's Blade or Dracula that's killing the attendants. If it's like Blade succumbing to bloodlust, or that's confusing to me. So I think they went with the right ending on the theatrical.
Yeah, I mean, like, I like the theatrical one more, honestly. It doesn't add any confusion. I think a lot of the other ones are kind of a bit, or I should say the other 2 are a bit convoluted, not in like a bad way, just that like they give me more questions than answers, if anything else, and then like I'm left with more confusion over the ending of this trilogy. And I don't want that.
But maybe those questions are answered in Blade the series. Blade Trinity Fun Fact number 9. The inciting incident between Snipes and Goyer was over accusations of racism. Yet again, per Patton Oswalt, on one day on the set, they let everyone pick their own clothes. There was one black actor who was also a kind of a club kid, and he wore his shirt with the word garbage on it in big stylish letters. It was his shirt, but when Wesley came down to set, which he only did for close-ups, everyone was done but his stand-in. Excuse me. I only did one scene with him, but he comes on and goes, there's only one other black guy in the movie, and you make him wear a shirt that says garbage? You racist motherfucker. And then he tried to strangle director David Goyer.
Well,
this movie is a fever dream. Everything surrounding it is a fever dream. I do not want to hear otherwise.
Do you want to hear perhaps
oh dear God,
Blade Trinity fun fact number 10? That from Oswald's interview on the matter, the rest of the cast's way of dealing with the challenging shoot was just to make up crazy lines in hopes of getting Snipes to break character. We would all, he said, and I quote, we would all just think of things to say for him and then cut to Wesley's face not doing anything because that's all we could get from him. It was kind of funny. We were like, what are the worst jokes and puns that we can say to this guy? And then it would just be his face going, I mean, I'm glad they had a way to cope on a stressful shoot.
I think that's a great way to cope, honestly. Oh God, just say the dumbest thing you could possibly think of and then you just get a serious fucking Blade face.
It's so fantastic, man, because I can so see it, because you see all throughout the movie, like, no matter how much Ryan Reynolds is being Ryan Reynolds, he's just, like, stone cold face no matter what, and, you know, I gotta respect him for that, because he's committed to being Blade, he is Blade, he's the man.
Yeah, I just don't know, like... Honestly, I think knowing these facts makes the movie a little bit better on a watch because you can at least be like, yeah, that's that cracker trying to mess with Wesley Snipes. Like, there's, like, some context there because a lot of, like, the fact that there was all these behind-the-scenes issues and the director's hiring biker gangs to pretend to be security from the studio and, you know, they're trying to mess with Snipes and all that tension, like, it really does unfortunately come through in the movie. It really, I think, reflects in the final product in a really poor way, but... when you watch it with, like, the lens of, like, knowing some of this, you can at least kind of sort of laugh some of it off.
Yeah, at least a little bit you can give it, like, okay, at the very least you were dealing with a lot of shit at the time, so, like, fair. And then, like, it does put in a lot of context for, again, like you said, how some of these... you know, again, for, like, example, the fight scenes, how those ended up the way that they did. It's just, it makes me look back at it and go like, oh, okay. And it gives a little bit more, I guess, a fun context to the rest of the movie, even if it is not that great.
I see it as, like, the silver lining of, like, the movie was shit, but at least we have stories that are fun. Because these stories, like, come on, Wesley Snipes refusing to leave a trailer and signing notes as Blade, like... come on, like, that's very fun. And watching this with that knowledge is very fun.
To make it, not to, like, take some of the wind out of those sails, but Blade Trinity fact number 11 is that in April of 2005, just 4 months after the release of Blade Trinity in theaters, Snipes actually sued New Line Cinema, Goyer, and the executive producer Toby Emmerich. The suit was for more than $5 million in damages, according to Variety. The suit alleged that Snipes was not given input on the director, cast, and screenplay, which was in violation of his contract. He asserted that he was harassed and defamed because of his race, so actually quite serious, and also claimed that the efforts to select a diverse cast and crew were thrown by the wayside, with the production instead hiring only white people, which led to feelings of isolation and exclusion. Snipes' main complaints with the Blade Trinity script were the humor, which he found to be juvenile, which we all agreed with, and the fact that the focus was less on Blade and more on the Night Stalkers, which we also kind of commented on. He was right. He believed the real purpose was to set up spin-offs for Beale and Reynolds' characters, which rubbed him the wrong way. The suit was eventually settled out of court with no public disclosure of what, if anything, was paid to Snipes as a result of it. So, a little bit of resolution
something,
there.
I guess.
Can I get a story about everything that happened during the production of this movie? I feel like that would make a much more enjoyable film.
That could be a good book. Yeah, you're right. Or a good film, a good behind, yeah. All right, so guys, I mean, in terms of the movie itself, what are your favorite things, your least favorite things, and would you recommend? I'm not recommending. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but I do think there's some, like, if you're gonna trill it up with the boys, you're gonna binge the Blade trilogy. Honestly, I do think you should include Blade 3 is what I'd say, because I think it kind of serves this, like, purpose in that regard of, like, you can watch the first two and have a good time, and then the third one can just kind of be on in the background, and you can kind of laugh at it and poke fun at it and have fun with it. But it's not a good movie, and I generally wouldn't recommend it. Like, just sit down and watch. I just don't find it overly enjoyable, even if there's some degree of entertainment value, especially knowing the contexts and the stories of, like, the crazy things that happened on set. Favorite thing is probably got to be the blood bank, the human blood farm stuff. It's just really freaky, and it's the only time the movie actually feels sort of in keeping with the other two Blade movies. Least favorite thing... surprisingly, I'm not going to say Drake. as weak of a villain as Drake is, I'm tempted to say just the lack of identity, because it could have been a cool instance of the trilogy being 3 different filmmakers having 3 different distinct views, because Stephen Norrington from the first one and Guillermo del Toro from the second definitely have different but equally strong views on how to do a Blade movie. But there's really just like nothing there in terms of what Goyer does directorially. That said, the biggest issue to me is I gotta side with Wesley Snipes here. It's the focus on the Night Stalkers. There's way too much Night Stalker and not enough Blade. And if you're gonna kill off Whistler, who I think is like gotta be, I would assume, the general public most beloved side character in these movies, who I'm really missing by the end of the movie, by the third act when we haven't had him almost the whole time, and you got to replace them with someone good. So this movie needed more Blade and less Night Stalkers, and maybe it could have been decent, but it's not decent.
Yeah, I agree. I actually do recommend this movie because I think it's just fun to laugh at. I don't have anything more to say in terms of why I recommend it. It's not a good movie. It's bad. It's the only reason I enjoy watching it is because it's funny to watch with all this crazy stuff and side knowledge in the back of my mind. The worst part of it, I think, is just that it comes through the fact that there was so much drama. You can see that there's just not chemistry between any of the actors. And it just comes across as bad. And the best part, I think Wesley Snipes continues to be a fantastic Blade. I think he does what he can, despite the fact that you can tell he does not want to be making this movie. I like seeing him as Blade, even though that's the case.
I don't recommend Blade. Surprisingly enough, I don't. Wow, look at that. It's just not fun. It's pretty boring. And if you have been following the Blade series, just end it at 2, because you'll just be met with inevitable disappointment. And there's enough of disappointment in all of our lives, so just don't add +1 to your disappointment counter. So just don't watch it.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I guess I don't think I'd recommend this movie either. I think there are some shining moments, but not enough for me to recommend it. My least favorite part is probably, I want to say it's the fight scenes, honestly. That was the thing that I could point out was the most jarring change from the first 2 to me, to the point where it was like, while those were a highlight of the other movies, it was just so unenjoyable to watch any of the fight scenes in this movie, and it was just so sad and disappointing considering how great I thought they were in the 2 previous movies. And then my favorite thing, it's really hard for this one, but I think I'm just gonna go with Jason's as well, that like really I think Wesley Snipes is a great standout in the role of Blade no matter what, really. And it kind of, there is so much turmoil going on with the production of this film, and side with whoever you want, but like in the end I still think Wesley Snipes is still great and still is like one of those few castings that I'm like, he's Blade.
All right, I do want to leave you guys on a happier note to end things, and with a nice even dozen Blade Trinity facts. So here's a Blade Trinity fun fact number 12. Snipes seems to hold no ill will over the production and looks back fondly over his time as Blade. In an interview with Vice, Snipes disputed Goyer's claim that the two had never talked since, saying he is sure that they had talked at some point. Saying of the shoot, "I don't fault him, I don't fault anybody. That's just what it is, man. Nobody thought that the Blade stuff was gonna pop off in the first place. It was just an anomaly. All of it was an anomaly. It just happens over time. Nobody knows who was the one who struck gold, but everybody claims it. So he did what he had to do. We did what we did based on what we knew at the time, and that was the way it was. It's a wonderful thing where you can look back and say, hey, at the end of the day, we still did something great. Great people, great talent, great future. We laid the foundation for something bigger than we even imagined. That being said, we were the products of those that laid the foundation for us. So, Hakuna Matata." I just thought that was a nice way to end it, that there's no ill will, and that he, Snipes, had such positive things to say about the overall experience of Blade and what Blade brought forward after it. I think in terms of both comic book movies and, of course, in terms of black leads in action movies and in film, in blockbuster film especially. So on that note, thank you to ALO VFX for our artwork, ALO VFX, and thank you to Jason for providing the music for the podcast.
Yeah, I provided the music. I make music. The Upsides PA on Instagram, the _Upsides PA on Twitter, and the Upsides on SoundCloud. I'll be dropping tunes soon-ish whenever I finish them.
Oh, one more thing. If you want to see more Wesley Snipes vampire stuff, he has a cameo in the show What We Do in the Shadows, in which he is part of the Vampire Council, I believe. So if you want to see more Wesley Snipes vampire, you can watch that. So there we go. Yay!
Thanks, Matt, because I've been meaning to watch that. That may just be the little extra push I needed. Great movie, too, What We Do in the Shadows. So please follow Culture Illiterate on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to Culture Illiterate Podcast on YouTube. Subscribe. I don't think I said that right. You can follow us at illiterate_pod for both Twitter and Instagram for more of us, and you can reach us at cultureilliteratepod@gmail.com for questions and comments. Next episode, we return to a world that Jason knows and loves very deeply with Electra.
Oh no!